Hello friends, we are outside. It is a beautiful day and I have a few things I'm doing that really to me start off the summer season. And it's, of course, getting some herbs ready. This year I'm redoing kind of how I plant herbs. I've changed over the years how I plant herbs. Last few years I've been planting them in a kind of a small end of one of my garden beds. And it works well, they do wonderful in the ground. But this year I'm slightly running out of room because I planted more shallots than I usually do. That means I really want to change up where I'm putting them. Since I don't feel like putting in more garden bed area, I'm actually gonna be moving all of my herbs for the year into containers. And I thought this is a good time to talk about lots of questions I get on container gardening. This is gonna be specifically herb containers. I'm also gonna plant the tomatoes and peppers because we're finally getting to that warm time of the year. We're getting close to the actual summer season where they like that heat, so we can plant all of those things too, which you always know tomatoes are what? Most people's favorite summer food. Now, they're not everyone's, but I'm gonna show a few tips as I plant them. But we're gonna start with the wonderful, what I'm gonna call an herb garden, but on the patio. So right now it's gonna sit on my back patio versus eventually it'll probably go to right here behind me, but I'm gonna do a little bit of work to that area first. I'm gonna redo the gravel and everything and do some edging on it. So it's not gonna happen there yet. We're gonna actually be putting them on my back patio, and that's where we're gonna start. We're gonna talk about what containers I'm using, how I'm putting herbs together, how many to a container, the soil, and everything that goes into potting herbs in containers. So right now, the back patio has been a holding area, not only for all my ferns, which is where they always live, but it's been a holding area for all these herbs I've had sitting outside. So obviously I have a big, beautiful rosemary topiary. One of these is not looking good, and you're gonna see it really soon and be shocked. Yeah, there, I know it's not looking near as good. I cut it way back actually, and it's now having some new growth start all over it. So I'm hoping it eventually fleshes back out. I'm not sure if it got mites late in the season during the winter. It just wasn't too happy right before I set it outside. But anyway, this is where all my herbs are gonna live. I have some bay trees, I have a bay plant, I have a smaller rosemary plant, and what I have here in front of me are a whole bunch of containers I'm bringing out of the shed. And I'll probably have to add one more to it. Now, really what I'm thinking first are sizes of these. These two are about 18 inches across. I have a smaller one here, just because you can see it's a lot shorter. It's probably only 12 to 14 inches across, and then really only about 10 inches tall. I have a really tall one behind it. So what I want to do is really have a mixture of high, low, but all of them to be at least, over a foot wide. And that's because all these herbs can really take up a lot of room and they can drink a lot of water. So you want to make sure you have ample soil for them to fit in. So what I'm doing right now is just placing some herbs in the containers to see what I want to put where. When it comes to doing container gardening, honestly, the principles are the same as a traditional in-ground garden. The one big difference is the type of soil we're going to use, which we'll go over. In a container, it's going to be different than if we were doing this in my raised beds out in the garden. But also you want to think about still putting them in as much sun as possible. So these are herbs. They like full sun. That means at least 6 hours of sun a day. But the one big thing with a container is it's always going to dry out quicker, most likely, than it would in the ground. So you want to make sure you check it for watering every day, because if it's like right now, it's a little breezy here. If it's in a warm sun in the middle of summer with some wind like this, it's going to dry out really quickly, almost daily, because as these plants grow, their roots are really going to fill the containers because herbs can grow quite vigorously during the summer. So if we want a sampling of the herbs I'm gonna do, I'm really doing what I use in the kitchen. So what will be nice about actually starting these out here on the back patio is that during whether I'm shooting food videos or just cooking every day like I would for whoever's coming over or entertaining, these are the herbs I use. So I always do at least 2 plants of flat leaf parsley. I like the flat leaf over the curly leaf. It's just kind of a personal preference. And you really do wanna pay attention. So obviously every tag we know gives the sizing usually on the back. So this says 12 to 18, tall and wide. The one thing is, I have had them get way bigger than that. But don't get scared about putting multiple plants together, because even though maybe in their true form, giving them that whole space is the best, when you start mixing plants, they're still gonna adapt to this area. So I'll do a few plants of the flat leaf parsley. When I can find it, I always love to do a pineapple sage. It is so delicious to use, and it's actually really beautiful just in the garden as an accent plant if you want it. What I love about it is it really does have more of a bright citrus, sage type flavor and aroma. So it's really fun to use in different dishes. I'm doing a couple different little plants of French thyme. Now, we're gonna talk about once I plant this, cutting it back, because you can see it's already blooming. We want more foliage than we do bloom. So I'm gonna cut it back. And then what we're gonna do is use this really as almost, what I'm trying to envision as I'm doing these is creating little containers of annuals. So we're using some as accents. The thyme is a good accent because it will kind of spill over the container and fall out the front. The pineapple sage is really of a kind of a main show-stopping plant. In this one, I'm doing a mixture of 3. I'm doing some flat leaf parsley. I'm doing just a traditional sage, which can be a perennial here, so I can always pop that in the ground later. Some bronze fennel, which I love the bronze fennel. It's really beautiful, but I love fennel to eat. Over here, we have a purple sage with some more thyme. I also back here have some dill. I always get the fern leaf dill because I think it just does really well for foliage, and it does flower too, so you can use it in pickling. And then some different basils. Some basil I will direct sow out into the garden by my tomatoes, and then I'll still do a couple in pots here just to have a different variety. So anytime I'm planting anything, I always think first, any container that's going outdoors or indoors, I like to make sure it has good drainage. And by that I mean a nice big drainage hole in the bottom of the container, which I can show you. So all these are just glazed terracotta containers that I'll use in various places. They're old ones I've had for quite a while. Now on a patio, it'd be a good idea to have a tray under them, just because depending on the water, sometimes it can be staining. So if you don't want that, adding a tray underneath is always gonna be key. So this, you can see right in the bottom, has a nice big hole. That's what's gonna make sure that it has good drainage. Now, I still will always put a piece of broken pottery shard or something over it. Sometimes I use hardware cloth, just something that's gonna allow the water through but the soil to stay in. Then I always use all-purpose potting soil when it comes to anything in a container. And I always love Espoma's all-purpose potting soil because it's organic, so it works great not only on annuals and on anything I put in a container, it works great on vegetables or things like this for container gardening, because you don't have to worry about what's in here. There's no synthetic fertilizers, there's nothing harmful in it. So the reason we use potting soil as opposed to topsoil or raised bed mix is because potting soil is really designed to make sure that it drains well, holds on to the moisture needed, but drains well. Espoma's has really good organic matter in it, so I really like that it can kind of slowly feed things with just good organic matter. Now to up that, since I'm doing herbs that can be used to maybe a little bit more in-ground type nutrients, I like to add a little bit of garden tone. I think that just kind of mimics the idea of what could be in my garden. I sometimes will even add some compost to a container like this, and I will still add a little bit of biotone to the container too. So anytime I'm planting anything new, I like to add that biotone just to make sure. And you can see here when you're working with the soil, it has such a nice, lightweight consistency. It's not heavy. That's what a topsoil would be. It would be too heavy for a container. So when I'm potting this one up, I'm gonna do a mixture of bronze fennel, which bronze fennel can get pretty big. But you know what's great about herbs, especially when it comes to container gardening? They do grow. Don't think they're not gonna grow. They're gonna grow, and they're gonna grow big, especially if you water them, take care of them. The one thing you can do though for any type of herb is keep it in check by making sure you're using it, cutting it back. That's gonna be key here to make sure none of these overtake something else, is we're gonna need to continually be using them. Now, if you let them go untouched, that's okay, but what they'll do is they'll get very big and they could start crowding out each other. And really the key with any herb, especially basil, cilantro, dill, they can all start flowering very quickly if they're not used. So what you wanna make sure you do is go in and are cutting it back regularly so you have what you need. So what you can see here, what I'm doing is really creating a mixture like I would almost an annual container. I have some bronze fennel, I have some sage, and I have my flat leaf parsley. So all these are gonna grow so you have different textures. And this way, if you want, plant them like an annual container. Some of these are beautiful in their own right. So if you don't have a lot of space, you can do herbs, not only use them in the kitchen, but also use them just for beauty too. So I'm just finishing up my last container here. Now, what you're gonna notice is some of these are planted a lot closer than your tags would say together. Fern leaf, dill, this bronze fennel, they can all get really large, but I'm gonna be understanding that, meaning I'm gonna water them accordingly. So as their roots get really full, as these plants all grow, I'm gonna be cutting them back so I can use them. And what I do in the summer is when they're growing excessively and you're thinking, I can't use all this up if I'm cutting it back for new growth all the time, I'm gonna start drying that in the kitchen or in the oven, and I'm going to then grind it up, use it as dry dill or whatever it is. I'll do the same with basil even. I'll dry it out, and then that's what I use sometimes in the winter, because when it's freshly dried, it has so much flavor because those essential oils are really fresh. Unlike sometimes what you buy in a grocery store that's been sitting there for a long time. So I will probably shuffle these around during the summer. I may even put them out on my other patio, like I said, but for now they have to stay up here as I'm not ready to have them anywhere else. But the big key now is going to be watering them. So if you've ever had an annual in a container, flowers, anything blooming, you know that it has to be watered regularly. These herbs are going to be the same way. The big key is to pinch them back as you're using them. So all of that thyme that had the flowers on it, I'm gonna be pinching all that back, and you can use that in the kitchen. Don't feel like you can't use it. Even the few little flowers are fine to use, they're edible. But what this is gonna do is every time you trim something, same with a shrub outside, like even like if you're gonna trim your boxwood, what that cut does is spur new growth at that point, usually in a Y. It comes out both sides of it. The same thing is going to happen to any of these herbs that we trim back. So as you see them wanting to go flower, especially basil, especially things like that, because that can go so quickly, and then you're sitting there thinking, wait, what do I do with all this flowering basil? What a flower means for a plant is that it's done producing. It's getting to the point where it's flowering, and it's just putting all of its energy into the flower. If you keep nipping these back, they're going to keep fleshing out growth all season long. And that's true for all of them. But now if you want some more ornamental aspects, like the pineapple sage, when it blooms, it is beautiful and pollinators love it. That one I very well may just let flower after a while, after I've been using it for quite a while. And you can still use it, it just doesn't have near as much new foliage then. So I'm watering these all really well, then we're gonna run out to the garden. So we're out in the vegetable garden, and you know, sometimes this seems like the least exciting thing, but I think it can be one of the best things to get into. So I started vegetable gardening when before I could walk. Mom would have us out in the garden with her while she was working and tending to it. Usually two of our grandmas was out there too, all summer long, because at that time, mostly obviously because Mom wanted to be able to help on the farm economically and we couldn't afford near as much, she would grow as much as she could to can, preserve, freeze, to help feed us all throughout the winter. Even though we are a small family of 4 total, she still did all those things. So it just was really ingrained into me and really became a part of me. And I think over the years, we all change and maybe evolve the way and why we garden. One of the reasons I love to garden is knowing where my food comes. I love the challenge, and I love being able to come out and grocery shop outside. But I do understand that it's a privilege anymore to be able to garden. It takes time. You know, it takes a lot of space sometimes, but what I'm doing today is planting tomatoes and peppers. And while I'm planting a big swath of them in 2 beds, you can do this on a small scale in a container. So if you want to plant 1 tomato plant, you can do just a container of a tomato plant. And you can use a really good container mix. All-purpose potting soil is what I would use. The spoma is always what I love. And you can do the same with a pepper. You know, put it in a nice sized container. You can grow both of those. Same with herbs, you can go to containers. So any of this applies to containers, what I'm going to plant today. And I'm gonna start with tomatoes, I think, which is actually gonna be in the bed right here. So I rotate my beds. Right beside me is the cole crops. I rotate 4 of them every year in rotation. So the tomatoes have not been in this bed for the last few years, and now they're going into it again. We do that just for soil-borne diseases and for anything that could kind of harbor in that soil. You hope it kind of works out somewhat or gets better by the time you plant in it again. So I can't find my plant tags to label anything. So I just am making a little chart, and I usually put a garden book together anyway inside, so I'll transpose this into that. But what I'm doing right here is just listing out all the tomatoes I'm gonna grow. I always know that in my long 24-foot bed, I grow indeterminate tomatoes, and I like to give them plenty of room. You can pack them in slightly tighter, but I will only put 9 in my 24-foot bed, so they have ample light air circulation and room to grow. I let them get massive. They usually get over 6 foot with the tomato cages I put them on. And so I like to give them plenty of room. Now, what you will notice in this bed, it was top dressed last fall with a mixture of kind of a leaf and a little bit of grass clipping compost. When I picked up leaves with the mower and mulched them, I either put them on the compost pile or last year I decided to put them on a couple beds because, you know, when it comes to tomatoes, soil-borne diseases, which is like tomato blight, it usually comes from the soil splashing up on the plant. So I'm hoping this layer of nice leaf compost actually helps mitigate some of that fungus and some of that blight that can actually happen to tomatoes. So what I'm gonna do is start spacing them out. I have it already drawn out. I think one of the things that can be handy, just we're gonna go through tools, when you're going to plant things is a ruler. If you're not used to it, or if it's hard to eyeball things, which why eyeball if you don't have to? Use a ruler, because it's gonna help you know exactly how far apart you wanna put things. You know, tomatoes, I would do at a minimum of 20 inches. And I'm gonna say I slightly probably go a little bit bigger than that, but 20 inches. And then for the peppers later, I go more around the 18 inch, 16 to 18 inches probably apart. I don't mind packing those a little bit closer. I usually have plenty of tomatoes, so let's get started. So what you're gonna notice, and I get asked this almost every year because they look kind of funny, are these big red terracotta, we call them tiles. And what they are is just a cylinder that is open on both sides, and I'll show you here. So these are old field tiles. So in the Midwest, when you have big farm fields, you tile them so the water drains off. And these are what they used to do it with. So in the past, when they've switched over to different types of tiling, these sometimes are dug up and you have some of them on a farm. Mom had always used them, and I love using them, and I think Grandma did this too, around like a tomato plant. So when I grow my own, or if you buy your own, they can be a little bit, you know, tender when they're really small. And sometimes it gets windy here, or actually all the time. This year it is windy all the time. So you want to protect them. So this is heavy enough that nothing can blow it over. It's quite heavy terracotta. So we will put these around it sometimes and then remove them as they grow before I put any type of cage on it or anything. But this just helps protect them. So with tomatoes, the big thing, and you've seen this probably when I do reels on it, is to plant them deep. Now, some people don't realize this is such beautiful, healthy soil, by the way. Raised bed soil is one of the most beautiful soils if you're not used to it. Kind of amazing. Now, if you notice right now, let's just measure it to see how deep. I have planted this. So far, we're about 6 inches deep. And that's because tomatoes will grow roots out of their stem. So the deeper you plant them, and we'll look here how deep I'm gonna actually plant it, the more sturdy they're gonna become from all those extra roots they're planting. Now I like to put tomato tone right down in there. Tomato tone has a lot of calcium in it. Tomatoes do really well with calcium because that helps them ward off any of that blossom end rot that can sometimes be caused by calcium deficiencies or too much water. So I'm gonna check here which one I am planting here. It's gonna be the giant white, which honestly, that is my worst looking seedling, but I am bound and determined to get this giant white someday to grow. So I'm gonna plant it. So what we're gonna do is sink this one in the hole a little ways. I'm gonna leave just a little bit out at the top. Now I'll zoom in here when we're going down the line. Now don't worry, if this one doesn't work, I have a backup tomato plant to put in here. So usually since I start all my own tomato plants, I start plenty, and I start usually about 2 of each type. That way, if one doesn't do well, since I'm starting my own, I can do it again. Because the thing is, I want certain varieties, so I start my own, and I plant all heirloom varieties at my house. So they're usually unique colors that I think have unique flavors and sweet levels to not as sweet, and the acidity and not as acidic. So I like to plant all those. So I like to make sure I have plenty of them when I'm doing it. So I can always just, now that I have that planted, is put this right over the top. Not only will it keep it a little shaded so it doesn't dry out as quick, it'll protect it from the wind. So right here I have my hole, and again, it's at least 6 inches, if not 8 inches deep. I'm gonna put my tomato tone right in. And again, this is formulated for tomatoes, and it really does make a great difference. The amount of beautiful root structure and then health the tomatoes have is, to me, just really wonderful. So I'm mixing that down in there with the native soil. I come over here to my tomato plant, and this one is gonna be a giant one. It's one of the big mortgage lifters. Now what I do when I plant it deep, if there's any leaves that are left on it like this is still the cotyledons that first come out. And you can see it's a nice big root there. Now, growing up, Mom would have always laid hers over more in a trench, and I think people do that more just so you don't have to dig as big of a hole. I've done that before too, but I've also done it where you just set it down. Now, I try not to disturb the roots too much. These are still tender roots. They're just freshly planted. I'm gonna set it right there, and you'll see once I plant it and put all this soil back around it, how it really is sinking in quite a bit of that stem. And I'm really only leaving out about maybe 4 to 6 inches of the plant that was growing. And that's the beauty of it. So now it's gonna get, from here on, Look at that beautiful plant. It's gonna get roots all the way down, and it's gonna be really solid and have a great standing. So I'm putting all my soil back on. Since I'm doing my leaf mulch, I'm gonna set that back around it, and then I can place this big terracotta tile right over it. And now you can see it has that beautiful protection if there's gonna be wind. I have a few more to go, then we can go on to peppers. I forgot to bring over the last one, which is actually one I purchased. For some reason, I never grow this sun sugar. It's a sun sugar, which I love. I think it's better than sun gold. It's a much sweeter, beautiful, yellow cherry small tomato. But when I always buy it every year. I should just save seeds and grow it. But anyway, this is a good example too. So if you purchase them, sometimes they're pretty big, right? Pretty big starts. I have found no matter what size tomato you buy to begin with and plant, until the sun hits, nothing really grows that quickly, and even my small ones that I started are gonna catch up to this one and most likely produce at the same time. But what I will say, when you're planting one like this, there's two things. It has way too many leaves of growth. I will definitely still be trimming off these bottom leaves, just like I did on all of mine, because I wanna sink it into the ground even deeper. And tomatoes send off suckers at every little joint. And you've probably seen me talk about this before, but let me bring it in so you can see. When you come in, you see that even, like right here is a good example. Right here is a little sucker. I usually come in and take those off as they grow. So if you can start when they're small, there's no reason. They're just gonna overgrow and try to overproduce, and you'll get less overall. And if it's blooming already, or like this one has a little tomato, it's just gonna stress the plant, and it is gonna take it way longer to actually be able to grow. So I pick off any blooms, because that just means it's slightly overgrown in the greenhouse. Take all that off. And now, I'm even gonna take off this bottom leaf here. So I'm literally removing, exposing, and tomatoes don't love their roots to be messed up too much. So I just lightly do this, and then I will sink it down in the hole still, pretty deep, as you can see, and it is going to be able to put roots out all over still, like the others. So even if you're buying your tomatoes, you do the same practice to them, just like I do of any of the ones I grow. Peppers and tomatoes usually get planted at the same time. You want to wait, of course, until it's no threat of freezing. You know, tomatoes, when it gets below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, they shut down. They don't like the cold. They're really a summer plant. And we kind of push it year and year and have gotten to the point where we're planting things in May in Zone 5B where I live. Some people try to push it even before that. And really for these summer plants, the summer doesn't start till towards the end of June. And that's really when that heat starts kicking up, the humidity starts kicking up, and the plants start really thriving. So obviously we are well past the threat of frost, and that is why I am planting both my tomatoes and now my peppers. So my peppers, I do somewhat the same. I push the limbs a little bit on them, plant them pretty close. I'm gonna say I plant them about 18 inches. And this one I have a little bit more of a thick layer of leaf mulch in some of the areas, but really it's nothing too major. What's nice about it is it's gonna also help trap in moisture. It's going to really self-compost too. So I grow a variety of hot peppers. I love hot peppers. I should have said with tomatoes, I grow the heirloom ones, and then over at Mom's, I think she's planting them right now, we plant the ones that we can with for juice, for salsa, for diced tomatoes, and we usually do Amish paste and a Roma variety, another Roma variety with that. So we'll do all those over at her house because she doesn't love eating tomatoes raw like I do. So I do all the heirlooms here. So I'm doing lots of them, from Pantera to Flavor Burst, lemon jalapenos, Anaheim, which we love to use in salsa, Craig's Grande, some Cubas, Cayennes, hot bananas, lots of hot banana peppers because I love to use it in the hot pepper mustard I have on the website. And then I'll do some, of course, bell peppers over at Mom's. She likes the sweet peppers to grill with and cook with more so I do all the hot, and she usually does the sweet. So for these, I'm planting them somewhat the same way. You can see I have beautiful starts of peppers this year. So I'm gonna start with the Pantera, and if I can't pull them out gently, I will use something to make sure I get them out. But you can see when I pull them out, all that nice root structure around that whole pepper. Now, unlike tomatoes, these I don't sink in near as deep. I'm gonna plant them pretty much at the level they're at when I pull them out. They are not like tomatoes in that they don't want to be overly planted deep. So I'm planting them right at that level. I'm going to slightly cover them up with that leaf mulch and then move on to the next one. So that to me is one of the easiest Wyse, I'm checking to see, make sure I don't have two different types. Sometimes I do two of a type, it just depends what one it is and how much I use it, and sometimes I just do one. So what I'm gonna do is start just going down the line. Now with these, this bed I add compost to every year, and I do that with all my beds. With my compost I use at home, or with a good organic purchased compost. I'll just add that right to it every year, and so that's a top dressing on the bed. So it's always getting good organic matter to build the soil life and health over the year, so I don't feel like I need to over fertilize it. Now if I would want to, I would add just some of Espoma's garden tone to the bed, right on, and just kind of mix it into the top few inches of soil so it works down too. It just kind of depends. I don't feel like this bed, after I add so much beautiful compost yearly, really needs a lot. On this now, you might be able to see a little bit better. So I do have these big trellis here, and this is what I put usually cucumbers on both sides. So I don't plant peppers right beside that, so I can plant cucumbers to vine up if I want to. But then that's where then I start all of the peppers. Now on that side, I did habanero, Thai red chili, I did serranos, I did Santa Fe grandes, I did a different type of jalapeno, and I also did poblanos. Then at this end, I kind of decide if I want extra of any of the ones I've planted, or I also might put my eggplant down here. But all these are roughly spaced right about 18 inches apart, and probably closer to 24 inches between the two rows. What I will do is stake them once they do start growing, and I'll show you later on how I do that. I just put one stake beside each one and always keep them tied to that stake. It can get pretty windy out here, like I said. So staking it just makes sure that they don't blow over, because I have had them break if I don't do that, especially once they put on a lot of peppers, a lot of fruit. They really can get heavy, and the wind or just the weight themselves can pull them over or pull branches over. So staking them for me is really what does best. And obviously they produce extremely heavily later on here in the season. So all that's planted now. I might decide if I want to go get a couple eggplant in, we'll see. I hope that explains some things on how and why I plant peppers, I plant tomatoes. Planting them deep is going to give them such a solid, good, beautiful growth. That tomato tone really helps control that calcium and give them the nutrients they need. Potting containers with herbs. It's a great way to garden if you want to just dip your toes in a garden with herbs, or if you don't have space for a traditional garden, to put them in containers so you can enjoy them maybe close by to the house, right outside your door, whatever works for you. Container gardening really is super simple. All it is making sure you use the right soil, and making sure you water them enough, because when they dry out, they're gonna need water to keep growing. So you wanna make sure you're continually watering them throughout that growing season, and that goes for any plant in a container. If it's a pepper, if it's a tomato. Tomatoes don't like to be overwatered, but in containers, they dry out really quickly. Get outside, garden, enjoy it, plant something, your body will be glad.